Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the meeting of the Strategic Planning Committee. I'm Councillor Ernie Clark, and following full council on 20th of May, I've been appointed by the group leaders and the monitoring officer as the chairman of the committee, and I will be presiding over the meeting today. Therefore, there is no need to vote to appoint a temporary chairman. Councillor Nigel White has been appointed as vice chairman. At this point, can I say thanks to Councillor Greenman for his previous work as chairman, and I endeavour to run the meetings as well as he did. So thank you for your work in the past, Howard. Can I ask that all devices are turned to silent for the duration of the meeting, and if there's a fire alarm, please exit the building via the nearest exit and congregate on the grass in front of the building. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and broadcast live to the Wiltshire Council YouTube site. All documents pertaining to the meeting can be accessed on the Wiltshire Council website. I will now formally open the meeting. So, apologies. Apologies have been received from Councillor Brautigan, who is substituted by Councillor Chris Vaughan, and from Sam Blackwell, who has been substituted by Councillor Andrew Griffin. I would ask if there's any others, but I think we've got everybody else here, haven't we? That's it. Minutes, item 3, minutes of the previous meeting, pages 7 to 32. The minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of April are included in the agenda pack. Do any members have any corrections to make to the minutes? Okay, I will ask in that case that we... Can you...
There is a point of order. Thank you. I'd just like to have clarification from the DEM services officers that everybody participating in this meeting today has attended the mandatory planning. We were told by email that it was very important before any of us participated in any planning meeting that we'd all attended the mandatory training. I would like that clarified and put on the record, please, Chair, if that's possible. Thank you.
Yep, certainly I can confirm that everybody in attendance today has undertaken the mandatory training to take part in the committee, and I will record that in the minutes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. So I will ask that we approve and sign the minutes as a true and correct record, and I seek a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Palmer. Are there any objections to confirming the minutes? Okay, there being none, the minutes are approved. I will sign them at the end of the meeting. Item 4, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of disclosable interest or dispensations granted by the Standards Committee? None. Item 5, Chairman's announcements, just the one. Please note that the date of the next meeting has been moved from the 24th of June to the 1st of July. Item 6, public participation. I will now summarise how the item to be determined will be debated and how public participation will proceed. Firstly, the planning officer will present their report and explain their recommendation. They may invite comments from other officers if appropriate. I will then ask members of the committee to indicate if they have any technical questions they wish to ask of the officers. We will then proceed to public participation. Up to 3 objectors and 3 supporters are able to register to speak for each item for up to 3 minutes each. Could I just say that for this meeting, obviously there'll be a bit of flexibility on that, but for future meetings I intend to take a lead from the new chairman of Wiltshire Council and enforce the 3 minutes rather more strictly. But I would point out to people that you can, of course, email members in advance if you want to make any points to members of the committee. Following the public slots for objectors and supporters, there are slots for statutory consultees, such as Parish Council, Town Council. We will then hear from the formal representative from relevant parish councils for up to 4 minutes. After the parish councils, I will then invite the local unitary member for the application to speak. I will then open the item to debate. I will ask the first committee member to speak to move a motion, which must be seconded. Officer advice may be needed to be taken in relation to any motion. At the conclusion of the debate, I will proceed to the vote. Is everything clear to everybody? Okie doke.
Chair, can I just interrupt? Sorry. Okay. I thought, are we not going to vote for a vice chair in this meeting?
No, at the full council meeting, it was agreed that the appointment of chairman and vice chairman for this and several other committees would be delegated to the group leaders and the monitoring officer, and that has been done. So the chairman and the vice chairman have been sort of selected, if you like, by the group leaders. So it's a done deal.
Okay, that wasn't my understanding.
That is what was agreed at full council, and it has been done. And there should have been an email sent out. Certainly I had one yesterday, but that may have been as a group leader. But the chairman and vice chairman have been agreed for the year by the group leaders. Okay, item 7, planning appeals and updates. I'll hand over to Kenny Green to give a presentation. Could I just say to people, please, if you have any questions relating to the old Sarum, it may be better if you direct them to either the monitoring officer or the head of planning, just in case anything's said in public that the Wiltshire Council might regret later, because Wiltshire Council is applying to take it to judicial review, in case you weren't aware. But anyway, I'll hand over to Kenny.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and a welcome to all our returning councillors and new councillors. So on page 33 of the agenda, there are 2 determined appeals. And for the benefit of our new councillors, it's probably worthwhile me saying that the appeals recorded on the agenda for Strategic Planning Committee are those determined applications and appeals that were reported to this committee. There are other appeals, and they appear in the respective area committee agendas. So the page on the agenda only lists 2 appeals where the applications came to this committee. So following on from what Councillor Clark mentioned about this old Sarum appeal, which I won't mention too much about, the one that I will concentrate on is the one for land west of Westbury Road in Warminster. And as I can see, there are quite a number of councillors that may well have heard me say previously that this appeal has been ongoing for at least 15 months. And it was an appeal that was adjourned twice, and it was an appeal that was ultimately dismissed. And as members may well have seen themselves, it was for an application for 205 dwelling houses on a land outside of the settlement of Warminster. So it was a speculative, unplanned development. And at the time of the council's assessment, it was a 5-year housing land supply judgment call, which during the course of the appeal, which lasted 15 months, that position changed, which meant that the actual case came back to this committee twice. And some of the members here today may well recall 2 reports coming at different times with 2 different recommendations, bearing in mind that the housing land supply was a critical material consideration. Ultimately, this committee, as a council, determined that that application should be refused, and the developer took it to appeal. And as I said, that appeal was adjourned twice, and ultimately a decision was made in mid-May. And it was also an issue that was raised at the early point of that appeal by officers that circumstances had changed in terms of drainage, which the appointed inspector had to take into account. So whilst the reports that came to this committee were relevant at the time, things changed. So when it came to the appeal scenario, officers representing the council had to make the inspector aware of different changing circumstances. And ultimately, the appeal inspector came down heavily on the fact that part of that site was at flood risk, which is a material consideration for planning applications, and it was certainly a key issue for that appeal. Now, the site, for those councillors that don't know the particular location, it isn't subject to river flooding, it's surface water or ground flooding. And it just so happens that during the course of the appeal, we had updated information from the Environment Agency, and our mapping system was updated, which we passed that information on to the inspector. And the inspector duly took that into account and asked lots and lots of questions of the key parties to that appeal, both the appellants and the council. And the inspectorate found that although the council didn't have a housing land supply, and we still do not, paragraph 11 of the NPPF, which councillors here today will hear lots about, the presumption in favour of development when the council doesn't have a housing land supply isn't automatically engaged when there is technical grounds such as flood risk. That's one key issue that the government have made very, very clear, that the presumption in favour of allowing housing on sites that aren't planned aren't subject to that presumption, quite rightly, because land subject to flood risk shouldn't be developed upon. So that appeal made it very clear to the appellants that they should have went through the sequential test process. That is a technical assessment that's done effectively by officers in conjunction with the Environment Agency for sites that are subject to flood risk, where the council is asked, are there other sites that could accommodate that level of dwellings on sites that aren't at flood risk? So councillors will hear flood risk zone 1, 2 and 3. Land zoned 1 is not at risk of flooding. That is land that we consider, and the Environment Agency consider, and the government has outlined as being acceptable for residential or vulnerable development. Land that's subject to 2 and 3, 3 being floodplain, that's not considered acceptable for housing or vulnerable developments. And part of this appeal site was found to be within 2 and 3. So the inspector, not surprisingly, dismissed the appeal. The other interesting parts to that appeal decision, for the benefit of councillors that may not have read the decision, is that during the course of the appeal, the appellants complicated matters by submitting misleading information, conflicting information, and the inspector certainly picked up on that in his decision notice. So it's an interesting decision for members to read, notwithstanding the fact that it does touch upon the issue that this council has to consider when we've got housing on sites that is not planned, is not part of our allocated suite of development sites. But as I said, if there's technical grounds to refuse residential development and paragraph 11 of the NPPF is not engaged, and the planning balance is such that development should be refused, then that is certainly a robust reason to dismiss appeal, and that is what that appeal ultimately failed on. There's lots more in the appeal decision. It's a very lengthy appeal decision, and as I said, it took 15 months for the planning inspector to reach a decision. I will pause there, Chair, just in case there are any questions, because I do have a brief comment to make about the Old Sarum appeal. Thank you.
Absolutely. Any questions for Kenny on that one, please? Councillor Newbury.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much, Kenny, for the update. I didn't attend the hearing, but I know of one or two who did, and they were disappointed that Wiltshire Council didn't seem to be firing on all 4 cylinders. Indeed, was it there? I'm just, could we know who represented us at the hearing? You did, Kenny?
There, Councillor Newbury.
You were there, okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm struggling a little bit because I wasn't there and I'm not at all sure quite what exactly happened. But did we have anyone else other than you, Kenny? I mean, you obviously were struggling. You were working on your feet. You were reeling with the punches, so to speak. But I was just going to ask to be reassured that the committee's decision was suitably defended, and I'm gathering that it was.
Well, like I said, there was a course of action that appeal followed because of the changing circumstances. So we had a barrister, Hashi Mohammed, represented the council as counsel, and we had the case officer and a range of consultees advising and helping the inspector along the way to advise upon flood risk, biodiversity, all sorts of issues. It was an appeal where the council did not formally contest the appeal, because of the 2 grounds that were refused, that the application was refused on, fell away because of the Housing Land Supply position, and Section 106 was ultimately entered into by the appellants. So there were no grounds that the council could defend, but there were issues that the council was advising the inspector on as being material to that appeal, notwithstanding the changing matters relating to drainage. So this council, at the time of its assessment, we didn't have grounds to refuse on flood risk because the mapping didn't show that land being subject to flood zone 2 and 3 risk. It was during the course of the appeal that the mapping was updated with the help of the Environment Agency, that we then had to instruct or advise the inspector that there was changing circumstances that he had to take into account, and we were there as a main party advising the inspector that that was a key issue that he had to then take into account. So we had a range of people supporting the inspector on behalf of Wiltshire Council.
Okay, thank you.
I'll move on to the second listed appeal, and that is at Old Sarah Mail Airfield. I won't talk about the actual appeal decision because, as Councillor Clark rightly says, this council has approached the courts to consider opening up a judicial review, and there's obviously legal reasons why we should not be speaking in public about the appeal decision. But as Councillor Clark has said already, if there are any questions that councillors either can think of now or coming up, then the advice is to approach the monitoring officer, Perry Holmes, or indeed the Director of Planning with those questions relating to the specifics of the appeal. But as things stand, we're waiting to hear back from the courts in terms of our potential challenge. The potential challenge rests off the back of a fire that took place on the site, which was a material consideration at the point of the appeal being heard. So the council has approached the courts, and we'll have to wait to hear back from the courts in terms of what they decide. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Kenny. As I say, I don't think it'd be appropriate for any questions, so if you do have anything, if you could follow the lead given by Kenny, please. With that, we move on to item 8, which is the one planning application we have today, 2023-05157, land off Freestone Grove, Westbury. That's pages 35 to 102 of the printed agenda. And I'll hand over to Verity to present the report and recommendation.
Thank you, Chair. I just thought it would be useful just to do a quick run through of the difference between an outline and a reserved matters application. So the application that is subject to today's meeting is an outline planning application with all matters reserved. Therefore, I thought that I'll just give you a quick rundown of what an outline application is. So an outline application seeks to determine whether the principle of the development is acceptable. An outline application can also include some matters for consideration, or like the application before members today, all matters are reserved. So therefore, in this instance, the only matter that is open for full consideration is whether the principle of development is acceptable or not. A reserved matters application follows an outline consent being granted, and that provides the specific details of the proposed development that were not submitted at the outline stage. The reserved matters, which follows the outline, comprises of 5 specific elements, which includes the means of access. So that's how the access that would serve the site, how the site would be connected to the existing network, the accesses and the sort of internal road layout for vehicles, cycles and pedestrians. Also the appearance, details of how the development would look like, landscaping, which relates to planting, details of any screening or enhancement to protect the amenity of the site, layout, how the building's access, areas of open open space are set out within the site. So the layout is specifically about how that site would be set out with all the particulars that the development's wanting to achieve, and the scale, which relates to the height, width and length of each building. So this application is seeking outline planning permission to construct up to 36 dwellings with all matters reserved. Therefore, as previously mentioned, this application is seeking to establish the principle of developing the site only, with all specific matters relating to the development to follow as part of a future reserved matters application at a later stage. This proposal constitutes a development plan departure due to housing being proposed on an unallocated site located outside the settlement limits of Westbury, which is why this case is before members today in accordance with the scheme of delegation. This application was previously presented to members during the April Strategic Planning Committee meeting, with members voting to defer the application to allow time for officers to contact the applicant to provide them with the opportunity to consider three specific points. Firstly, to reduce the quantum of housing from the up to 40 dwellings initially proposed to 30 dwellings as put forward in the draft neighbourhood plan site allocation. Secondly, to consider the construction routing to the site to reduce construction traffic travelling through the existing residential estate. And lastly, to seek the applicant's agreement to reduce the timeframe for submitting the reserve matters application from 2 years to 3 years. Each of these points will be discussed during the presentation and are set out from page 35 of your agendas. Officers are recommending the application be approved, subject to the signing and sealing of a Section 106 legal agreement and the planning conditions, which are listed from page 42 of your agendas. I just have one correction to make regarding the wording of condition 13, which should read as no development shall commence on site. Currently, there's an erroneous not, which will be removed. The red outline shows the land that's subject to this application. So as background, the application site forms part of an undeveloped parcel of grade 3 agricultural land, which borders relatively recent residential development to the north and west, with the existing knoll cul-de-sac to the south. There's a better image of that later, which I can show you. The application site extends to 1.7 hectares in size. To the east is Coach Road, which is a single track road with limited car passing places, and beyond Coach Road is open countryside. The application site is located within flood zone 1 and is not shown to be an area susceptible to groundwater or surface water flooding, and does not fall within any landscape designations, but does fall within buffer zones associated with the Salisbury Plain Special Protection Area, the Greater Horseshoe Bat linked to the Bath and Bradford and Avon Bat Special Area Conservation, and within the grey hatched area of the Trowbridge Bat Mitigation Strategy. In terms of landscape character, it is appreciated that the site is currently a green field, but it is located on the existing urban edge of the town and is viewed in context of the existing residential developments. The council's landscape officer does not consider the proposed development of the site to harm the wider character of the area or to be sufficiently harmful to the important views of the Salisbury Plain escarpment to warrant a landscape-based objection. This map just shows where the existing public rights of way are. So to the south of the site is West 1, which connects to West 1A, which is to the knoll, which is a cul-de-sac, and then you've got Coach Road along the eastern boundary. The proposal would be looking to establish two new access points to existing roads through the Millbrook estate, the full details of which and details of the internal road layout would be reserved for a future reserve matters application. In terms of the principle of the development, whilst it's appreciated that the site is located outside the defined settlement boundary, which is defined by the solid black line, which encompasses existing residential development to the south, the application site is surrounded by existing development to the northwest and to the south, which is located within the settlement boundary. So the actual application site is sort of located right on the boundary of the existing settlement limits line. And to the east of the application site, so the other side of Coach Road, Coach Lane, is the a draft site allocation that is coming forward as part of the emerging Wiltshire local plan, which has been shown by the blue hatching, which, if found sound by the planning inspectorate, would result in this subject site being completely enclosed by residential development. The emerging local plan policy, which is policy 62, land at Bratton Road, seeks to allocate land for approximately 260 dwellings and land for nursery provision. Whilst only limited weight can be afforded to this at the moment, this proposed allocation does demonstrate that the council considers this particular side of Westbury to be acceptable for housing and to be a sustainable location. This slide provides an indicative concept plan for the Bratton Road site allocation. So the area is sort of coloured in green and sort of that kind of mustard colour. This is an extract taken from the Emerging Wiltshire Local Plan, with the site subject to this application sort of shown to the west of that. The concept plan shows that this sort of mustard yellow colour is a part of the draft site allocation, where potentially residential development could be sited, which again sort of endorses the fact that this particular part of Westbury is considered suitable for new housing. In terms of the second deferment point relating to construction traffic routing, the applicant has been approached following the April meeting to review all available alternative routes around the site to seek whether there would be possible haulage routes that could be utilised in order to reduce construction traffic having to go through the existing Millbrook estate. The applicant has agreed to consider additional measures, such as restricting the size of construction vehicles should they need to travel through the existing estate roads, and has accepted the imposition of a planning condition which would need signing off prior to any development commencing on site for the submission of a detailed construction traffic management plan. There might be an option to use a section of Coach Road to the east for some deliveries, which would not be dissimilar to what was agreed as part of the approved construction management plan for the adjacent Millbrook development, but this would require full consideration and assessment in addition to a full package of mitigation measures, which the construction traffic management plan would need to include. In terms of other possible routes, the applicant has stated that a route from the southwest corner of the site would have ecological impacts through the removal of shrub and trees, in addition to the temporarily blocking up of a footpath that links the Millbrook estate with Bitham Park estate to the south, which leads onto local schools and the town centre. The other option that was raised at the April meeting was the formation of a possible route through the emerging site allocation to the application site, which again would likely involve the removal of several sections of hedgerow along the eastern boundary. Given that the boundary on the eastern edge of the application site is to be retained and enhanced as part of the application to a minimum width of 10 metres to support bat habitat, the loss of any additional hedgerow along this boundary is unlikely to be supported. A revised note has been added to the construction traffic management plan condition, requiring the applicant to consider all alternative routes outside of the application site to see whether there would be possible haulage routes outside the red line as part of any future discharge of conditions application, in order to limit the number and amount of construction traffic that might need to go through the existing estate. Also, as mentioned at the April meeting, the construction traffic management plan would need to demonstrate how construction traffic would be managed to and from the site, and would need to include a robust package of mitigation measures to ensure the protection of existing residents and the highway. Given that a considerable amount of work would be needed to produce the construction transport management plan, it is considered unreasonable to delay the determination of this outline application, especially when there are no specific details relating to the proposal that's currently open for consideration. It's at this stage the principle of the development. In response to reducing the number of dwellings as requested by members during the April meeting, the applicant has agreed to reduce the quantum of housing down from the previously proposed up to 40 number to up to 36. The applicant has produced an updated illustrative master plan just to demonstrate how the site could be set out. But it's important to mention that this drawing is purely for illustrative purposes only, and will not be included within the approved plans list for the application. The proposal description also reads as an up to figure, which sets a maximum threshold of any subsequent future reserved matters. So we shouldn't be seeing applications come forward at reserved matters stage that are seeking to increase the quantum of housing beyond the 36 number. Whilst it is appreciated that the number of dwellings has not been reduced to the 30 dwelling figure that was previously requested by members in the April meeting, this site has not been allocated in the Made Neighbourhood Plan, and there is no policy requirement to restrict the number of houses to 30 on this site. The applicant has also provided a density plan for to show the application site with neighbouring residential development. So we've got one on the opposite side of the road, which is coloured in blue, which shows the quantum of housing to be at a 38 dwelling per hectare ratio, and the Millbrook, a site which the application site would be adjoining to be at a 38.7 dwelling per hectare figure, just shown by the pink shading. The now proposed up to 36 dwelling scheme represents a 34 dwelling per hectare figure, so the quantum of housing on this site would be less than neighbouring sites and less dense. Furthermore, the concept plan for the neighbouring site allocation and part of the emerging Wiltshire local plan indicatively shows that based on the 260 dwelling figure, the quantum of housing would be at 46 dwellings per hectare, which would represent a far greater density compared to this proposal. With due regard to the context of the site with it neighbouring existing residential dwellings, the council's housing land supply deficit, and with the national planning policy framework requiring developments to make optimal use of land to ensure homes are built at comparative densities, the reduced number of dwellings is considered acceptable in this instance. Just as background and as previously mentioned, this particular site was previously identified by the Neighbourhood Plan Working Group as a potential neighbourhood plan site allocation for approximately 30 dwellings, which is sort of shown by DDH3. This, however, was removed from the plan, and after concerns were raised by Natural England regarding the potential value of both sites for bats, and therefore the made plan did not include any site allocation. However, it does reveal that the site was considered a suitable location for future growth by the Neighbourhood Plan Working Group. This slide shows that in terms of sustainability and with reference to the submitted transport statement, that the application site is located with good connectivity to the existing town centre, which is located approximately 1 kilometres away, with the railway station being 2.5 kilometres away, with there being access to local bus services within 200 metres of the site. We've got an existing school sort of shown by the yellow square, a Lidl supermarket, and sort of the walking distance from the site to the town centre being about approximately a 20-minute walk. The image shows that there are a wide range of facilities in proximity of the site, and therefore it is considered to be a sustainable location. As discussed during the April meeting, the ecological parameters plan has been provided to identify the ecological features of the site and to ensure that bat habitat on the site would be protected. As previously mentioned, this identifies a minimum of a 10-metre buffer along the eastern boundary, which should remain as a dark corridor with there being sort of no lighting to ensure that it won't have any impact on light-sensitive species. The proposal also seeks to enhance on-site grassland and provide native planting, logs piles for invertebrates, and the introduction of bird and bat boxes. The Council's Ecology Department drafted an appropriate assessment which concluded that this proposal would result in no negative impacts on the bat sack, which Natural England were consulted on, and subject to such mitigation measures being implemented, which can be secured by planning conditions, no ecology-based objections have been raised. And I've got a couple of site photographs. This photograph is shown from the sort of proposed access point from Freestone Grove to the north. This image shows the sort of proposed access point from Cheviot Road to the west of the site. This photograph is taken from the existing public right-of-way to the south, which you can see there's the application site, but you can see the sort of existing residential development along the western and northern boundaries. Here's a photograph taken from Coach Road, facing this is again from the public right-of-way, sort of showing the existing residential development to the west. And this is taken from Coach Road facing the existing public right-of-way. And again, you can sort of see the existing developments to the south of the knoll and then along the western boundary. This photograph was taken further north along Coach Road, facing towards the western boundary. And again, you can see sort of the existing development that sort of borders the application site. This demonstrates sort of the urban fringe character of the site, with this site bordering the existing residential developments. As previously mentioned, this proposal does represent a departure from the adopted Wiltshire Core strategy due to the proposal representing speculative development on an unallocated site outside the settlement boundaries for Westbury. However, the emerging local plan sets out how the council should be delivering new growth in the Trowbridge housing area, which includes Westbury up to 2038. Within this, there is a need to provide a further 540 houses in Westbury, which this application would contribute towards. Furthermore, following the government's recent changes to the MPPF in December and changes on how housing numbers are calculated, the council now has to provide 84% more homes compared to previous calculations per annum. In addition, these changes have resulted in the council needing to demonstrate a 5-year land housing supply with a 5% buffer, which has resulted in a significant increase in the amount of housing the council needs to provide. These changes have impacted our current housing land supply figure, which is now at 2.03. It is considered that this proposal is located in a sustainable location, surrounded on 3 sides by existing residential properties, with the eastern side of Westbury being considered an acceptable location for future housing growth in the emerging local plan. This proposal would provide additional housing and affordable housing units, the benefit of which carry significant weight at a time when we need to boost our housing supply. In response to the third point of the deferment of this application at the March meeting, the applicant has agreed to reduce the time frame from 3 years to 2 years for the approval of the reserved matters. So again, the condition has been addressed in the suite of conditions to reflect that change. To conclude, following the MPPF changes, the council now has to provide a significant increase in housing and is unable to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply. As a result, the presumption in favour of sustainable development, which is also known as the tilted balance, is applied as set out in paragraph 11 of the MPPF. In this case, there are no protection policies that would prevent the tilted balance being engaged, and there are no technical objections to the application. As the Mage Neighbourhood Plan does not allocate land for housing, the protections that exist in paragraph 14 of the MPPF do not apply to this application, and the council must therefore determine the application against paragraph 11D, where there is a presumption in favour of supporting new housing, with applications only to be refused where the adverse impacts of allowing the development would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the policies of the MPPF as a whole. The provision of up to 36 additional dwellings and up to 11 affordable homes would contribute towards addressing the council's housing shortfall and meeting affordable housing needs, which has afforded significant weight in the planning balance. The site's location and access to public transport links and services and the economic benefits arising from the development, both in the short term and long term, and the contribution towards SIL are given significant weight. Moderate weight is given to the Section 106 contributions, the provision of open space, play provision, bat habitats and improvements to the public right-of-way. It is, however, duly appreciated that the proposed development would be on an unallocated site located outside the defined settlement boundary for Westbury, which represents a departure from our current core strategy. However, officers consider the harm attributed to this plan conflict, the disruption to existing residents during the construction phase of the development, and the loss of agricultural land does not significantly outweigh the benefits of delivering new housing at a time when we need it, and therefore only limited weight can be afforded to such harms. Officers therefore are recommending the application be approved subject to the Section 106 and planning conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Verity. That was very comprehensive. So hand over to members of the committee for any technical questions. Councillor Griffin.
Thank you. I appreciate that this is an early stage as an outline application. Within the Section 106 considerations, has any particular facilities been anticipated or contemplated? I note that there's a doctor's surgery within a reasonable walking distance of the proposed site, but does that have sufficient capacity at the present time, and anticipating future developments, both this one and others considered to the east of the site? I also note there appears to be minimal provision in the illustrative master plan that's on screen at the moment, and looking at Google Maps, there does not appear to be any significant play areas in the existing developments to the north of the site.
Thank you. In terms of the NHS contributions, none were put forward as part of this development. I'd need to just double check whether they provided any specific comments on the application. But all these sort of draft section 106 sort of obligations are set out from page 86 of the agenda, which sort of does include obviously the affordable housing requirement and sort of upgrades to the rights of way. In terms of the master plan, they are providing sort of an area of open space, and they are providing some sort of play facility to the southern southeast corner of the application site.
Kenny?
Just on the point of Section 106 contributions, there are 3 legal tests that apply for obligations that the council must pass, must go through that assessment. And as Verity said, if we don't have the evidence to back up a contribution for, say, a doctor's surgery, then that would be open to challenge. And as a council, we should not be putting a burden on a developer that cannot be evidenced. Just for a point of clarity, planning cannot seek a developer to pay for more nurses and doctors. That's a national decision. All that planning can really do is, if the evidence is there to justify a capital project like an extension to a doctor's surgery that's been identified by the National Health Service, and that additional population would trigger the need for an extension to a surgery, for example, that's the suggestion that could well then be a burden or a development contribution. We don't have that for this quantum of development. We don't have that sort of evidence from the National Health Service. On the point of the residential scheme that may well come through for the land to the east, that would have to go through its own assessment and consultation with NHS to work out, if it's 260 additional houses, what impact would that have on the local services such as surgeries and all the rest of it. But just for clarify, planning does not get involved in adding more doctors to surgeries, or it has to be a capital project. And for all obligations such as that, there needs to be a defined project. Planning decisions cannot just ask for money hoping that there's a project in the future. Unless we've got a project, unless we've got a defined evidence base, we cannot introduce that as an extra burden. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. I think that's good information for the new members of the committee. Are there any further technical questions? Councillor Newbury. Okay, thank you. Councillor Smith. Sorry, I'll come back to you, Christopher.
Okay, yeah, just a clarification around the status of the Westbury neighbourhood plan. I'm getting the impression that there's a new version in progress, but I just would like to know how far advanced that is, and is it replacing an existing one? Because this obviously has it comes into the equation in terms of the tilted balance and all that.
So I know that the Westbury Neighbourhood Group are advancing their neighbourhood plan, but again, at this stage, it doesn't carry any weight. It hasn't gone through referendum and it hasn't gone through an inspection, so it doesn't carry any weight. At the moment, we've obviously got a made neighbourhood plan, but as that doesn't include any sort of land for housing, certain sort of protection policies that are set out within the NPPF don't apply.
Is that okay, Councillor Smith? Yep, thank you. Councillor Newbury.
Thanks, Chairman. I think officers have done amazingly well with the 3 points that they were given to take away from the last meeting. So I'm not trying to be difficult or sort of raise any last-minute tripwires, but I've got a question here, which is, it is a technical question. It's one that I've asked before and not really had an answer to. It's about this developer contribution of 52,000 and something for early years provision. Now, the report says that we have 7 preschools and nurseries and 1 childminder within a 2-mile walking distance. But that doesn't begin to tell me if there is a chunk of money which the developer has to pay over, presumably to the council as part of the Section 106 agreement. What would then happen to that money? Presumably somebody would try to get hold of it. Presumably somebody, one of those existing early years providers or somebody else would come along and say, I'd like that money, please. But how does it work? I mean, how does the process go forward? How does the money transfer from the developer to the council to somebody else? And what is it spent on? I'm completely mystified by this.
To answer this one, Chair. If we receive money from any developer for a specific purpose, such as future early years provision or additional capacity for an existing nursery, that money comes to the council. It's held by the council until such time that we've got a dedicated project. So the money comes to the council, it's held. If there's no project and nobody comes forward asking for that money, then Section 106s usually have a 10-year clawback clause, in which case the council is obligated to pay that money back to the original developer. So in terms of the point you're asking, Councillor Newbury, we've got a dedicated team in the council's education team that deal with early years provision. They advise all our private sector operators when there is a project or a development that is going to contribute a sum of money, and they can request that sum of money as long as they've got a evidence base to justify it. So if they're saying, well, we've got a nursery, we're looking to expand it and extend to get more capacity, and it's going to cost X amount, then a judgment can be made in terms of how that money that the council has got for that purpose can be spent. So we've got a monitoring officer that deals with all Section 106 contributions, and Debbie Evans, is always involved with that sort of post-decision making in terms of when the council's got money available and we've got a dedicated project that meets that purpose. Obviously, all committee reports set out what we think is necessary in terms of a planning justification to meet the 3 legal tests. So there is a process, but it's not done by planning officers, it's done by a combination of the service within the council that is involved with that purpose, in this case it would be education, and the council's Section 106 monitoring officer.
So it seems to be up to some education team officer who gets the money, is that it?
Ultimately, and whether it's first come, first served, it might be that case, or there may be a list of known undercapacity facilities that are waiting for additional resources to part fund a project. That's entirely possible as well, because we know that some nurseries are either at capacity or very close to it, and if they've got a project in mind, and I do stress that it can't just pay staff, there has to be a project in mind, and it's usually an extension to add more space to accommodate more early years care.
Well, I won't pursue that. Could I, Chairman, while I've got this, the microphone, so to speak, could I just say a few more words? I think it was Councillor Smith who earlier on asked the question about how we were here today, and you've popped up as chairman. Was absolutely as agreed by us on the 20th of May. I mean, he may not be aware that in the last since the creation of Wiltshire Council, every annual meeting, we've had a leader's motion which has set out the number of people to be appointed on each committee and has also named the chairman and vice chairman of each committee. Exceptionally, at our meeting on the 20th of May, the group leaders had got themselves that nobody knew exactly what was going to happen that day, and the best that Councillor Ian Thorne could do on the hoof was to say, look, I'm moving the normal motion with all the committees, but we haven't at the moment got the names of the chairman and vice chairman. I would like to propose to the council that it delegates the job of appointing those to the monitoring officer in consultation with the group leaders. And one or two people around the room were expecting that, and one or two thought, goodness me, this is a new departure. But anyway, that was agreed. Nobody voted against that motion moved by Councillor Thorne, and that's the way it's happened. And I have to say, I think it's worked rather smoothly.
Thank you for clarifying that, Christopher. It's Stuart, Councillor Farman.
Because our group leader told us different names. So that's why we're expressing confusion, because we thought somebody else was going to be the vice chair.
I think that's something for your group to take up and resolve rather than for this committee. But,
Well, that's a question for the monitoring officer, I suppose.
well, whatever.
The appointments were delegated to the monitoring officer in
Yep, okay,
consultation with the
Chris-
group leaders. So if somebody thinks something's gone off the rails, that's a question for the monitoring officer,
Yep.
who isn't here today, I think, but no doubt he can be found.
No, but I think that can be taken care of outside this meeting, absolutely. Are there any other technical questions on the presentation? Councillor Vaughan.
Thank you. I'd like to learn a little bit more about the access in and out of the site during the construction phase. I've got many years of experience in the industry, and I know how what a pain it can be for residents with big wagons coming in daily, especially in winter months when roads can get very muddy. So I think it's fair to say the proposal in itself is a decent one, is designed well, it fits in, and the houses aren't so dense. So I think the biggest point for us would be learning how that works in practice of keeping roads clean and tidy and safe, and obviously safe for residents when, daily there could be very many big wagons coming and going. Can I learn a little bit more about how the safeguards and stuff is going to be put in place and how roads can be kept clear during the construction phase?
Thank you for your question. Given that this is outlined, we've got the specific details to do with the internal roads layout of the actual application site, and details of those accesses aren't known at this stage. But in terms of the construction transport management plan, that would contain specific details as set out on page 46 of the agendas, which include the routing plan, a number of vehicles that are likely to be expected on a daily and a weekly basis, and also details of road cleaning, wheel cleaning, and a suite of other demands that we would want to see that included within that construction transport management plan, including any mitigation measures, any potential kind of road stopping up, things like that that might be required in order to ensure that construction vehicles can travel safely around the existing network without there being a significant impact on existing residents. The details of that really would need to come as part of a future reserve, a future discharge of conditions stage, where all their package of measures and the details of their construction traffic management plan would then be fully assessed when we know a bit more about the specifics of the development.
Chair, could I just add to that, please? So I think the important point to make is that this is an outline with all matters reserved. So there is a follow-on application. Well, there's two applications to follow on from this if the committee was to endorse the recommendation to approve, and after the legal agreement is signed, because no decision is issued until the legal paperwork is issued. The point about the construction management plan is that a developer needs to get that approved before any work start on site. And following the April meeting, officers had a follow-on discussion with the applicant and agent and made it very clear that abnormal loads through that estate will not be acceptable and an alternative route will be needed. So that is why they've accepted and agreed that some routing through the estate will be probably proposed at a future stage. And what we'll need to know as officers and as the council, what type of vehicles and how often will they have to go through the estate. We will maintain as officers that we will prefer for that site, if it's endorsed by this committee, to be serviced via either Coach Road or an alternative route. And there could well be an alternative route that may well come forward. And I did mention this at the April committee meeting, that members may well recall that that land to the east being an a proposed adopted site, there may well be a future stage where both sites concurrently are either developed out or at least accessed or for enabling works. So there may well be the option, there might not be the agreement in place at the moment between the various landowners, but that may change. And we've made it very clear to the applicant and agent that we will want to see the evidence why that route cannot be taken from that land to the east. Coach Road is adoptable, so the council would want to see what types of vehicles could use that route to avoid the residential estate. So the condition is robust. It would require the developer to bring forward all the details that we require on a regular basis for residential development. So this is not unusual, and we would fully expect the survey work to be done for the roads, a condition report to be done to make sure that we know what the pre-existing condition is, so that post any construction we've got at least some evidence to show any damage that's taken place. But ultimately, as officers, we fully accept local residents are very concerned about this development potentially being accessed by all the construction vehicles through the estate. We don't think that's acceptable, and we've made that very clear to the developer. And they are aware that there are options, there are alternatives, and that condition will exist as long as the committee endorse its imposition on any decision to endorse the recommendation to approve. And there will be two follow-on applications. There will be a discharge of condition for the applicant to submit all the details that we've set out in that condition for officers to consult and include the council's highways team on that consultation, and also the follow-on reserve matters application, which will set out the developer's ultimate layout for the scheme. So the two will go hand in hand following any endorsement for the principle. And it is the principle that is up for decision today, nothing else, because we don't even know how many houses. It's an up to development. And I'll just make a point here that some people might think that when an applicant submits an application for up to 36, that automatically means 36 houses will be built. Anyone that knows the Woodmead estate will know that that was allocated for a quantum of housing. The application came in for less. It does happen. I'm not saying it's going to happen in this site, but developers do obviously maximise, for marketing purposes, what they think would best, for their purposes, end up with a sale at the end of the day. So there may well be a resulting development that's less than 36. So because the outline is an up to figure, a reserve matters application can be any number of houses up to 36. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Kenny. Any further questions? Councillor Freeman, and then I'll go over. Howard.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank you too for your kind words and congratulate you on your appointment. It's good to see you there. Thank you. There's not many of us from the existing, from the previous committee that are here, so it's good to have you there. I'm somewhat bemused by the vice chairmanship as well. I'm not too sure what happened there, but given that none of us seem to know who that person is. I have a point to make, really. There is a question hidden within there somewhere. In passing, I do think that the Coach Road access is an imperative, but I would like to thank the officers for all their work they've done on this, because this was discussed in tortuous detail, of course, in the April meeting, as we're no doubt all aware, which is why these three issues came out of it. I want to sound a note of caution, really, and concern over the 2 years. You'll recall, of course, that the previous application we had to this in the April meeting was the one in Holt, the Redcliffe Homes one, where they were happy to bring the application forward in 2 years. And we expressed concern at the time over the 5-year housing land supply, which had been reduced to 2.08 and then 2.03. It's not a figure that I think I agree with, but nonetheless, that's what we're left with today because of the recalculation of the metrics surrounding this. But the concern was, of course, that developers can have a tendency to land bank, and we're aware of that possibility. We know that there's those that can be brought into the mix and those that aren't brought into the mix. But it was that, of course, that was the main driver behind putting that imperative on the Redcliffe Homes to build out within 2 years. And it's that, of course, that was behind, because we managed it with that one, secured it with that one, but we brought it forward for this one here today. So I welcome that, because we do need to get these figures into the mix as quickly as possible. And we can't have these schemes drifting, as we have happened so often. And of course, the 2,500 houses between Trowbridge, West Ashton and Yarnbrook is a classic example of that. And that really brings me to my point and my question, and that is that I note in the report, understandably, you've put the 2 years following the securing of the Section 106 agreements, the legal agreements. These agreements can drift horribly, and we've seen this happen over years. And I know that one of the concerns that I've had, and I've shared a number of times within the council here, is that we outsource quite a lot of our legal work. And that can be a big stumbling block, and it can mean that these Section 106 agreements drift unnecessarily and make them overly protracted. So my concern is, and I'm going to sound this note of caution and even a question here, is can we somehow speed up the process? Do we have a mechanism? Do we have more officers? Do we have more facility capability within the council to be able to expedite these quicker than we have done in the past, given that some of them have been so painfully long, such that we haven't been able to include them within our housing land supply figure? And that, as you rightly point out in your report, was probably the main one of the 3 key points that were raised in the April meeting. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I shall take that, Chair. So I think there's 2 issues there. So there's the point that we have managed to secure the applicant's agreement to that reduction in the number of years that they would otherwise have to submit the reserve matters application. That 2 years only starts when we've got the legal agreement signed and the decision issued. In terms of the expediency of getting a Section 106, it can be a very torturous affair, because I've had a decision. The urban extension of Warminster took 4 years for the legal agreement to be sealed and completed. What we can do as officers is to pass on any committee motion or discussion that any residential scheme that would otherwise make a material impact on the housing land supply deficit is to make that point to our head of legal, so that when the instruction goes to legal to say this is a residential scheme that the committee are supporting because it would address in part the housing land supply deficit, and therefore as quickly as possible please prepare the Section 106 diligently still, but try and make sure that it is given due priority. That is what we can do as planning officers. We don't write the Section 106. It's our legal team that do the drafting, and they send it off to the other side to review ultimately. We do have a part to play. Members won't be surprised to hear that we are always part of the drafting, but there can be major delays in terms of a solicitor drafting up a Section 106. I would point out that in recent years, reports are becoming more and more detailed, and they're setting out all the heads of terms in ever more detail. So there really shouldn't be that major delay up front in terms of making a start, because we set it out for our legal colleagues in terms of what needs to be covered, and it's over to our legal team to make a decision on whether there is someone within the legal services team to write it up or to seek external assistance. All I can say today is we will take any instruction that this committee makes today to our legal colleagues to pass that message on. Thank you, Chair.
Well, if I may, without prejudice to what the decision may be, I'd like to put a marker in the sand on this one, because we have seen so many instances where, frankly, some of the reasons for the delay in securing the Section 106 agreements have been entirely fallacious, and I don't want to see that happen. I think we need to be far more focused ourselves and ensure developers are far more focused on securing that Section 106 agreement. It's in all of our interest to do so. So I'm going to put that mark in the sand, providing, of course, the application goes that way today. Thank you.
Thanks, Howard. I think the committee probably agree with you, and I'm sure we'll take a sounding on that, but it's something the officers can take back. Move on, Councillor Holder.
Thank you, Chair. Really following on from the comments about Section 106, and whilst I appreciate this is an outline application and not wishing to prejudge what the committee decides, of course, there is no guarantee that if the recommendation is to approve this, this will necessarily come back to Strategic Planning Committee. So I want to specifically refer to comments in the report on page, the bottom of page 87 with regards to the very short paragraph relating to the responsibilities of the management company. And I say I appreciate this is an outline application. I would ask if this is delegated as a decision to the head of planning to draft up the Section 106, as is shown in the recommendation on page 89, that I would ask what additional strength can we give to the delegation, should that happen, to ensure that the management company in this instance do actually fulfil their obligations. We have across the whole of the county a number of instances where management companies fail fairly comprehensively to deliver their obligations. I noticed that my colleague across, not just across the chamber, but across the other side of Melksham is nodding in agreement. Particularly in Melksham, we have significant number of issues where it appears that the Section 106s that have been put in place historically carry no weight for our residents, and we have situations where play areas are not maintained properly, where bins are not emptied, where dog bins are not provided. And I would respectfully ask that when we come through to the reserve matters, we have a significantly greater detail of responsibilities and obligations for the management company contained within the Section 106, that we can actually hold them to account. Appreciate this development is relatively small, but I'd like to put a line in the sand as a new member of this committee to say I will be holding this committee and asking this committee on a regular basis that we actually, where we can, we have the ability to strengthen up anything relating to management companies' responsibilities. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I'll get Kenny to reply. You're not alone in that. Many members of this committee are, I wouldn't say unhappy, but are not keen on management committees. And I believe there are some town councils that do ask for sort of first refusal to do that. But I don't know whether sort of Westbury is one of them. But Kenny, do you say?
That was a point I was just going to make, that during the course of any application or the early stages of an appeal, officers have been instructed by our director to have that open discussion with developers about considering any interested parish or town council that have already made it clear that they would be wanting to be part of that sort of early legal drafting stage to take over the management of public open space or play areas. I know Trowbridge are very actively engaged, and there are others, Melksham as well. I don't know what the situation with Westbury is. We're not at a stage yet where we can discount it. It's open for the early discussions at Section 106 to have that engagement with Westbury Town Council. So there's definitely, that's one option, that they could be ultimately the named management company. I would take, and I fully agree, Councillor Holder, that there are many historic decisions out there where the management company in the Section 106 could well have been more robustly written and have a monitoring element to that as well, not just setting up a management company. We need to know what happens when they fail, who then takes over the control, all the rest of it. And that is something that is now fed into our Section 106s. I'm not suggesting for a moment that our Section 106s cannot be further improved. And if this particular application is endorsed and the committee want a specific clause to be beefed up, or that particular point about management companies, their failings ultimately, or the future monitoring, that can certainly be taken into account and added to the instruction that we send to legal after any endorsement today. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Yeah,
And
if I
Councillor
if I
Newbury.
may,
So, big,
if I may, Chair?
beg your pardon.
I
Yep,
appreciate
absolutely,
it,
sorry.
Councillor New.
Yep.
That's really gratifying to hear from you, Kenny. And I think there are many instances where town and parish councils take responsibility for maintaining play areas, but don't necessarily take responsibility for maintaining the public open spaces. And I think it would be helpful to understand, you know, not just for this application, for future applications, where there may be, you know, an upcoming application where there may be a differential approach, where it's part parish town council, part management company. But it's gratifying to hear your comments about the ability to beef up the Section 106 agreements, because I'm sure the many residents who are affected, who are let down by the current management company, will be gratified to hear that. And I notice that there's many colleagues across the chamber are nodding in agreement, so it's not just Melksham that suffers from it. So let's hope that, you know, this new committee has the ability to beef these things up and put stuff in there that we can actually hold the developers to account, and as you quite rightly say, have a monitoring process. So where they are letting the residents down, who in many cases pay significant sums of money in ground rent to these management companies, actually get the services that they deserve and they're paying for.
Thank you. I'm sure that will be done. Councillor Newbury.
Chairman, I completely agree with Councillor Holder. So far as Westbury is concerned, Westbury has recently, as some members will know, Westbury has recently completed the takeover of nearly all of the open spaces in Westbury because the town council was willing to step up to the plate to do it. Of course, there isn't any duty on parish or town councils to maintain open space. That's essentially the task of whoever has taken them on in the first place, which in most cases is this council as the inheritor of the previous district councils who used to deal with this. I'm not sticking to the issues for today. I'm not completely persuaded that trying to beef up, going along with the idea of inquiring whether Westbury would be willing to, Westbury Town Council, I'm not really persuaded that beefing up the what's put into the Section 106 agreement is going to achieve very much. I'm the chairman of a management company, and I see it at the sharp end. And the difficulty is that you have a requirement on a small number of households to provide directors for a limited company, which has all kinds of sort of functions that it has to deliver. And you have the difficulty that you have to find people to carry out quite complicated functions who don't necessarily have the slightest idea how a limited company works or how to do it, and it's very difficult. Almost all of the people doing this are unpaid, sort of in the same position as parish councillors. They put their time in free and for nothing, and they're doing their best in a difficult situation. And beefing up the sort of obligations to be put on them doesn't, I think, achieve very much, because they're still left scratching their heads as to how to do it and what to do it and how to raise the money and how to persuade the people to pay up who haven't paid up. That's another big problem with management companies. You get an obligation which the householders have to enter into, that they will pay the money as soon as they're asked for it. And if they don't do it, what do? You can start suing them, but that can be sort of more expensive and time-consuming than simply sitting back and hoping that it will turn up. So, I think this is a new way of doing things, which has been sort of trialled ever since we started to get away from the old district councils taking over the public open space, and it hasn't worked out awfully well. But that isn't an issue for us today. All we have to do today is to agree what should go into the Section 106. And if we were to get to the point of trying to put something more onerous into the Section 106 agreement, I would say, well, the difficulty is that you still have all the same problems.
If I could just come back on one point. I mean, I do accept the point you're making, Councillor Newbury. There are Section 106s out there, and I'm sure you know the ones I'm going to be referring to, where we've got, or a particular parish has taken over the responsibilities because either the West Wiltshire District Council had that obligation and that was passed on. But we have to assess what we've got now, and we have to look at the Section 106 as it's currently drafted for new developments. And all I was saying in response to Councillor Holder's point was that if we end up with a failing management company, so if a developer sets up a management company and there is no clause in the Section 106 to set out what happens then, that's when we need the Section 106 beefed up, in my opinion. We need to have a fallback position clearly set out in the Section 106 that the developer knows not to set up a management company that's ultimately going to fail, and then we end up with the local residents having to deal with the matter on site. That was the point I was trying to make, that we need to have a Section 106 that sets out the scenario of a management company the developer sets up if the parish council doesn't enter into the Section 106. What then happens if that ultimate management company fails? What then happens? Because ultimately it's the developer scheme. They should be the one that's obligated to make sure that in perpetuity that site is properly managed, properly maintained and all the rest of it. And I think the Section 106 may well have grounds to be improved and include clauses that deal with that eventuality.
Oh, I see. So on a general point, you think that there could be a fallback, that the Section 106 provides for the developer to have an ongoing responsibility to make sure that things are done properly. Well, you'd obviously need pretty sharp legal advice on that. I'm not against it, but I've never heard of it being done up until now. So maybe we could note it down for something for us to get advice on before we finalise this Section 106 agreement.
We do have a legal representative here today, Mr. Hewitson. I don't know if he's got a comment to make on his experience for Section 106s where a management company is set up, fails, what then happens?
I think the difficulty will be that typically developers, once they've built the development, got their money, they disappear into the sunset.
And some of them
They
go bankrupt, some of them dissolve.
They effectively cease to exist. So I think in many cases it would be difficult to hold the developers' feet to the fire. But I agree with Kenny that there is one possible fallback position is the option of the local parish or town council taking over responsibility if the company fails. Clearly, you could consider endowments, making the developer pay up front so that it's less likely that the management company fails, certainly for lack of money. But I entirely take the councillor's point that the problem is management companies are made up of shareholders who are the residents of the new development. Many of them have no experience of running companies. The management company doesn't exist at the stage of the 106 being agreed with the developer, and the developer has little interest in how the management company runs because it will have disappeared into the sunset by the time that stage is reached. So it's difficult, but yeah, I entirely take the point. There can be fallback positions, etc.
Okay, thank you. I think we're going off on a bit of a tangent here, but as Councillor Newby says, it's something that I think we should take back, and perhaps it's something the new cabinet member could get involved with and seek his opinion. So any more technical questions on this specific application, please? Okay, with that then we move to public participation. We did invite the applicant to come along, but he or they appear not to have done. So we just have 3 objectors, and I'll hand over to Tara.
Okay, so the first speaker is Paddy Griffin, who's an objector.
I would like to thank the Chair and committee members for allowing me time to speak. I'm in a privileged position to be able to take time off and stand on behalf of the residents in Millbrook, as not all of them are able to take time off work. I'm shocked on 2 fronts. Firstly, the speed of the resubmission and the blatant lack of addressing all of the concerns raised by the committee and residents in the last meeting. My concerns still stand on the access via Freestone Grove and Cheviot Road. There is no need to subject residents to years more disruption from construction traffic of any kind, or future access traffic for residents. The resubmission has proposed a mitigation by reducing the size of construction vehicles through the estate. but the same amount of construction materials will be required. Thus, proposal will result in more traffic. After 6 years of constant construction traffic in the estate is finally finished, why does the planning officers feel that it's fair to run access for the field through a completed housing estate? Why was this field not developed when the rest of Millbrook was built? I think this point was brought up by a member of the committee in the previous meeting. The access route shows a lack of planning and thought for the residents by the planning officers, and has not considered any other viable options which were discussed in the last meeting, as they would have required further work and planning applications by the landowner. It's an easy option in their head. In the previous meeting, we heard that the developer had intended to use police cones to prevent stopping within the construction route, meaning that for 2 years, residents would be unable to park outside their own homes. This would be wholly unacceptable and further demonstrates that the estate isn't suitable for any additional traffic. The increase of traffic would prevent children from playing in the streets on their bikes and scooters, etc., safely during the summer and school holidays. We would like to draw the committee's attention to application 1600547 in respect to the land off West Drynham Lane, where this committee refused consent, supported by the planning inspector on appeal, on the grounds that it's damaged the amenity of their existing residents and unacceptable in the view of failure to fully demonstrate how and when it would integrate to the wider allocation. Once again, I want to point out the access route from the A350 to Millbrook on the papers in front of you is incorrect and misleading. It shows passing places where there are pinch points. This was brought up in the previous meeting and hasn't been addressed, further demonstrating the rushed reapplication and lack of planning by the planning officers. The intended route is actually extremely difficult to manoeuvre even for light vehicles on a daily basis. I feel that no emphasis in this resubmission has been drawn to the wildlife that lives in the surrounding bushes that remain after the landowner destroyed the majority with no permission. No thought to the negative effect of biodiversity in this field and the additional planting that would be required to offset in addition. It's frustrating to hear that this point was being used to discount viable alternative routes when the landowner has already cut down the hedgerows. The ratio of houses to land was also mentioned in the previous meeting. The number of houses noted that it should be reduced from 40 to 30. We've spoken about this. This hasn't been done. Earlier, the planning officer mentioned that land deemed of risk of flooding in zones 1 and 2 won't be considered for a viable build site.
Sorry, sir, can I ask you to wind up? You've had over 3 minutes, please.
Okay, yeah, I'm almost done. Millbrook has an attenuation pond currently. Land off Freestone Grove has flooded in the last 5 years. So why is this application being considered? In the points you mentioned. This is my last sentence. This quick resubmission has been entered without even a bare minimum of thought for the revisions in anticipation it would go through with any objection, as there would be no time for residents to raise objections. This feels underhanded, and I feel that the committee members and residents deserve better, and the submission should be refused due to not addressing the points raised in the last meeting and the damage it will cause the amenity of their existing residents. I ask the members of the committee and chair to take a thought for the hundreds of residents it will affect. The field, as we have seen, is not accessible via a main road.
Can you wind up, please?
Yeah, it's through a finished established housing estate, and there are more viable locations elsewhere. I ask that you refuse this application. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And our next speaker is...
Charlie Reynolds, please.
Hello, thank you. So yes, I'm a resident. I'm also an adjudicator at the Housing Ombudsman, so I understand the immense demand that is under with our housing applications from this council and councils across England. However, I do have to, I know this is an outline application, but again, I go on Councillor Vaughan, who brought up the access in this estate is not viable for roof trusses, large vehicles, HGVs. You can barely get one car across a road. You won't be able to turn these HGVs. This will pass my house, so I'll sit doing my job every day with the Housing Ombudsman, watching these vehicles. No access parking for 2 years while construction vehicles are there is not viable for the residents of our estate. estate. And like I say, I understand this is an outline application, but further thought needs to go into this before we look at that field in particular, although I understand the pressures you're under as well with having to build houses over the coming years. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And finally,
David Ryder, please.
Thank you to the committee. Just to say about the construction traffic that comes through the estate, I actually witnessed not so long ago myself sitting behind a big articulated lorry bringing in a JCB to redo our roads, and he had problems to access off of the 350 coming onto Millbrook down to Buffalo Road. He had to stop there and just freeze there, stopping cars coming past his lorry. Eventually, after about an hour, it was moved. Also, going on what Paul was saying about the hedgerows, I've started to notice now that wildlife started to come back to that field, i.e. rabbits, birds, hedgehogs, even deer, which, you know, is very, very nice to see for where we live. And for this application to go through, I totally disagree. Thank you.
okay, thank you very much indeed. Now we were hoping to have Councillor King with us, but
No, sorry, we've also got the parish council to speak as well.
okey-dokey.
So
The
that's
West-
Councillor
West-
Jane Ross, yeah.
Okay, Westbury Town Council.
Good morning. I'm Jane Russ and I speak on behalf of Westbury Town Council in my capacity as chairman of the council and member of both its neighbourhood plan and highways planning and development committee. Westbury Town Council remains opposed to this application but accepts the principle of development on this site, subject to strong conditions being imposed upon the developer to protect the amenity of neighbouring residents and maintain the integrity of our neighbourhood plan. The Town Council and nearby residents remain concerned about the construction access for this development. The recommendations of the report are for this matter to be largely deferred for later determination by officers as reserved matters or within the Section 106 agreement. However, we believe that it is essential that safeguards for the residents of Millbrook are formalised in the Section 106 agreement and reinforced within this committee's decision. What the Town Council and its residents are seeking here is an explicit condition that no access whatsoever by HGVs will be permitted via the residential streets of Millbrook. This must be reinforced by appropriate signage from the A350 and prohibition of site workers from parking within the residential streets. And these provisions should be reinforced by the Section 106 agreement. Residents of Millbrook wish to avoid a continuation of the stress and frustration they have endured over the last 6 years at the hands of the development of their estate. As previously mentioned, we would draw the committee's attention to the application for land to the west of Drynham Lane, where this committee refused consent, as did the Planning Inspectorate on appeal, where this committee on the grounds of damage to the amenity of existing residents. In this instance, the plan included with the papers in front of you is inaccurate, as its depiction of the access from the A350 over Millbrook. The route is actually extremely difficult to manoeuvre for light vehicular traffic, let alone HGVs, which are defined as of at least 3.5 tonnes. The contemplation by Millbrook residents that as soon as they are able to have peaceful enjoyment of their homes, it will all begin again is a horrifying prospect. In bringing this application back to committee so speedily, officers have relied upon further information provided by the applicant, which I fear may not be entirely accurate. In preparing our neighbourhood plan, the site was thoroughly tested for development density, and 30 was deemed to be the appropriate amount. The emerging Wiltshire local plan didn't even deem the site as suitable for development at all. At the April Strategic Planning Committee, members requested the number of dwellings be reduced from the original for this application 40 to 30. Officers are now recommending raising this to 36. But this is based upon data interpretation provided by the applicant that we believe to be incorrect. The applicant advised that housing density on neighbouring developments are 38 dwellings per hectare. These calculations appear flawed. The plan at item 3.1.3 of the report shows analysis of 38 dwellings per hectare at the Mead, known as Whitehorse View, and Bitham Park, known as Millbrook, measured by dividing the number of dwellings consented by the site area that is woefully undercalculated. The correct site areas, as stated in the original planning applications for these sites, are 9.13 hectares at Whitehorse View and 11.18 hectares at Millbrook. This gives the dwellings per hectare of 24.1 and 26.83 respectively, a density for the application site even lower than the 30 houses requested by this committee. Thus, the Town Council reaffirms its commitment to a maximum of 30 dwellings on the application site. Two short final points. In light of the emerging local plan allocations, the Town Council is of the opinion that the application site would serve a better purpose as a green lung at the heart of the larger development included in the local plan proposal for 260 houses to the east on the other side of Coach Road under Emerging Policy 62. Lastly, the Town Council remains disturbed that, following the applicant's tree survey report in November 2022, roughly 75% of the parameter habitat was destroyed, 75%, in an extremely cynical action impacting the biodiversity of the site. To compensate for this, we would request a much higher biological net gain condition being applied to any future developments here. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. As I say, as we don't have the local member with us, I'll go to the officers and see if you've got any responses or comments, please, on what's been said.
Thank you, Chair. In response to the speed of the application coming back to committee, it follows the deferment of the previous application in April, in which there was sort of a motion of 3 particular points, which our officers have been seeking to sort of address and come back to. So we've sort of tried to take on board those comments that were raised by members and to work with the applicant to sort of come up with sort of solutions to those points that were addressed. In terms of the quantum of the proposed site, again, that we have been able to seek a reduction to the total number of dwellings on site. And again, this is an up to 36 figure, and which again, as Kenny mentioned previously, at reserved matters, we might see less housing coming forward on this site, but we consider that the up to 36 figure to be acceptable given the densities of neighbouring sites. In addition, there was no sort of policy requirement for there to be a restriction of only 30 houses on this site. That hasn't come forward as part of sort of the Made Neighbourhood Plan to restrict this site to only have 30 houses on it. And we considered that there being an up to 36 number of dwellings on the site to be acceptable. In terms of the hedgerows, I appreciate that some habitat has been lost sort of over the termination period of this planning application along that eastern edge. All I would say is that the application includes measures to introduce additional native planting and create a sort of a buffer which would be sort of used as a dark corridor along that eastern edge. There would be native planting going on in that eastern side. with additional sort of species-rich grassland in order to help encourage and support sort of foraging and commuting bats. So we are looking to provide and secure sort of a buffer along that eastern edge for ecological reasons. In terms of the why this site hasn't been included as part of the sort of emerging local plan, I think at the time where we were looking at sites as part of the emerging local plan, this site hadn't been pulled from that neighbourhood plan, and I think that there was some thinking that this site was going forward as part of the neighbourhood plan and therefore wasn't sort of included as part of the council's sort of own sort of search for sites and site allocations. In terms of the Millbrook, why it wasn't included as part of Millbrook, my understanding it probably would be linked to sort of a land ownership issue, and at that time that site sort of wasn't seen to be included as part of the existing Millbrook development. With regard to the construction traffic, I don't know whether Chris Manns would want to provide some sort of additional information in relation to that, but given the fact that this is outlined with specific details relating to the particulars of the application not being open for consideration at this stage, we sort of maintain that having a construction traffic management plan condition being an acceptable way forward. And as already discussed, that condition details quite a lot of sort of specific requirements that we would expect any future transport management plan, traffic management plan to come forward with. And again, that would be subject to sort of fresh assessment to see whether we consider that to be acceptable, and will include sort of details of where those routings will be, and all sort of a package of robust measures to ensure that there wouldn't be sort of a detrimental impact on residents.
Thanks, Verity. Just before we go to Chris, if Chairman, you would like to bring in Chris Manns from the Highways team, I think it's worthwhile just reflecting upon the draft neighbourhood plan. It did not set a threshold for 30 houses. The actual policy said approximately 30 houses. That means that an application can legitimately come in for more than 30 houses. So there is no threshold, there is no baseline for 30 houses for that site. And we do need to be making decisions on a reasonable basis based on what the current position is. That 30 house quantum was never examined, didn't go to referendum, so we do not know whether that was an acceptable number of houses for that site. And I'll bring you back to an earlier point that Verity quite rightly made, that decisions need to be made based on the current NPPF. The current NPPF is very clear that optimal decisions need to be made in terms of quantum of housing for sites. It will look pretty bad on this council if we were to put forward a scheme on a site that is under-delivering. The government not only tarnishes the council because of poor delivery of housing and not delivering enough housing, they equally say to the council, you should not be supporting schemes that are inefficient use of that site. At a time when we've got a housing land deficit, we should be maximising schemes. 36, up to 36 houses for this site will not be overly dense. It will not be a character that's not representative in the local area. And if we get 260 houses on the land to the east, that will have a higher density than this site and the Millbrook Estate and Bitham Park. The point on the construction management plan, I would just reiterate again that the applicants fully accept what officers have went back following that April deferment, that there are other options other than going through the residential estate. And that condition on page 92, I think it is 93, sets out a list of requirements that the developer will need to provide to this council in terms of setting out how they envisage site operatives, where they're going to park, how they're going to access the site, the number and type of vehicle, all the rest of it. This is a fairly standard, robust condition that we impose on residential estates all across the county. And one final point, Chair, the NPPF is also very clear that when a planning condition would suffice, we should not also attach that requirement in a Section 106. You should not have a burden in a Section 106 when you've got a planning condition covering the same issue. So, picking up the point that the Town Council have just made, officers maintain that that condition serves the purpose that we identify as being required in terms of securing an appropriate level of detail at a later stage, bearing in mind this is outlined, so it's not relevant for the assessment for the principle of development, because as we've heard today, this site has been identified by numerous parties as being acceptable in principle. The issue on the quantum of housing, officers are making a very clear point that up to 36 houses is acceptable. It would be comparable to density in the local area, and it would be less than the allocated site that's coming through in the local plan for the next stage. The point of construction traffic, there is a follow-on process, and I don't know if you want to bring in Christopher Manns at this stage, Chair, in terms of the highway position.
If we could, yes, please.
Thanks, Chair. I think Verity and Kenny have covered the issues of construction traffic quite well in their assessments. What I will add is that MPPF states that you can only refuse applications on highway grounds for two reasons. One is a severe capacity issue, and there is no evidence in this case that this development would lead to a severe capacity issue on the highway network. And the second one, which is more potentially relevant, is an unacceptable impact to highway safety. The construction traffic management plan would ultimately is designed to ensure that any safety implications of construction traffic would be mitigated to ensure such an unacceptable impact would not occur. I think it's important to highlight that access for new development for construction traffic through existing highway networks, including residential estates, is not an unusual occurrence. There is inevitably an impact to residents in regards to that. But as a highway officer, we would be looking at the technical aspects of that and ensuring that any safety issues can be mitigated. That would include swept path analysis. I know that there's a lot of concern about the tight nature of some of the roads within the Millbrook estate and the bends within that. That is fully noted. We would be making sure that if access is sought via the Millbrook estate, that we would make sure that any vehicles that, the largest vehicles that would be expected to deliver to the site would have swept path analysis undertaken across that full route to ensure that they could make those turns. I think Verity touched on the sort of other wider mitigation measures as well, such as wheel cleaning, road cleaning, the potential for restricting parking during delivery hours. That wouldn't be, I know some of the residents made comments that it is wholly unacceptable to restrict car parking on the highway throughout the construction phase, and that wouldn't be the intention of the local highway authority. We would be managing that with the developer to ensure that any parking restrictions were removed outside hours of delivery time, as well as avoided completely during certain phases of development where possible. I think that covers everything that, unless anyone wants me to speak on anything.
Can I just make a point? I mean, I agree everything that Chris has said, but the second point of condition 12 requires the developer to come forward with a definitive routing plan. That means that they have to show which route specific vehicles should be taking to access this site. So Chris has concentrated on the various technical aspects that his team would look at if Millbrook Estate roads were to be used, but as we've said repeatedly, there are other options. Coach Road would not mean any vehicles going through Millbrook Estate. That's why we're saying that's what the developer would need to bring forward as a detailed plan with all the other aspects set out in condition 12, which would need proper investigation, all the full assessments, and ultimately a decision needs to be made in terms of what type of vehicle could potentially access the site through Millbrook Estate. And I'm thinking the site operatives generally turn up in their own vehicles, not HGVs. That would be the type of vehicle that I would envisage could go through Millbrook Estate. The abnormal loads, I cannot see why they would need to go through the Millbrook Estate. There are other options available, as I mentioned before, but ultimately we've got a very robust condition The developer knows and have fully accepted, I'm looking at Verity, they've not discounted or challenged any condition that's in the agenda papers. So they know what this is being reported by officers today, and they've not raised any particular issue with adhering to those requirements. So I think with the combination of Christopher, Verity and myself, I think that covers the construction traffic, Chair.
Okie dokie. Thank you very much indeed. I must admit, personally, I dislike outline applications, as I'm sure many members of this committee may, but we have to deal with what's in front of us. So with that, really, I open it for debate to the members of the committee. Ideally, if the first person to speak could move a motion, but I can quite understand if that might not be the case today. But I'll throw it open to the floor. Councillor Parman.
I'll keep it simple and get people discussing it, so I move the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. That's, when you say the officer's recommendation, that's with the deletion of the word not from, or where are we? Condition 13, line 1, remove the word not, and the comments that were made about taking it back for regarding section 106 wordings and the concern about management committees for the officers to take back. Okay, is there a seconder for that, please? Okay, thank you. That's Councillor Cleesby. Thank you. So that's proposed and seconded and is on the table for debate. Councillor Newbury.
Chairman, I'm broadly in support of the recommendation, but I am a bit puzzled that the construction traffic management stuff is still, even at this, after all these years and weeks of extra consideration, it still seems to be so vague. Looking at paragraph 326, I haven't got the page number in front of me, but this is the officer's report, and it says, accessing the site from the north along Coach Road is not considered appropriate given the limitations that exist. I think that must mean the bridge under the railway. But it goes on, officers consider that Coach Road could be considered an option for large construction vehicles, and the required construction traffic management plan the applicant developer would be required to complete. So we have officers saying that the access for large vehicles along Coach Road could be considered an option, which presumably means that it's acceptable in general. And yet here we are, unable at this point to confirm that. We're effectively saying we're not confirming that. We're sort of leaving it as something that we hope can be achieved between now and when the permission is finally issued. And I'm just puzzled. Can the highway officer tell us what is there about Coach Road which means that we can't now say construction heavy vehicles will be along Coach Road?
Absolutely. I mean, Coach Road is a narrow single lane road. Average width, I would guesstimate around 2.5 to 3 meters wide. Depending on the size of vehicles used by the construction for delivery, that would determine what size vehicles would be appropriate for access along Coach Road. Because of its narrow nature, there's also a ditch on one side, I believe, and then soft highway verge as well. We would need further assessment about what size vehicles would also be suitable to access along Coach Road for those reasons. That would include swept path analysis, as I mentioned earlier, in respects to access through the Millbrook development, and then also with regards to turning access into the site. So the likelihood is that there may be some potential hedgerow loss turning into the site to have large vehicles making that manoeuvre due to the narrow width of Coach Road. And all of that requires further assessment, and it's something that we feel that we can adequately control via a planning condition.
But the width of Coach Road that you're mentioning is the width of the tarmac surface, isn't it? I mean, Coach Road is, it's a very old road. It's been there a long time. It stretches from hedge to hedge. I would have thought it's going to be more like, I'm not going to make a stab at it, but it's considerably wider than just the 2-point-something meters that you mentioned. It's a single track road. It's got almost no traffic on it. It's got probably more pedestrians than it's got vehicles on it. And I'm just completely puzzled that at this late stage in the game, nobody has been required to do the work to establish that Coach Road could be slightly improved to take the heavy traffic. Is that not something that could have been done?
As we mentioned, I feel that it's something that could be adequately conditioned. The width outside of the tarmac area of Coach Road is not significant. It's maybe half a metre on either side. With regards to hedgerow impact and also...
Well, can we look at it on the map? Can we have an overhead showing us the width of it?
So I was just seeing if I've got any more photographs from Coach Road that sort of show it. Sorry, but that's the sort of best I've got, just sort of showing it there. I don't sort of have any better pictures or images, I don't think, of it.
Can we see it on the map? I mean, it's the bit of Coach Road at the south end. It's between Bitton Park, which is the distributor road, and the entrance to the site. So that's, yep, there we are. So that's Coach Road along the back. And can we zero in on that a bit and compare it with the other roads in the neighbourhood?
So I don't think I can zoom in on that map, sorry.
It would seem that we can't, Christopher, Councillor Newbury.
Okay, but I mean, there we are. In paragraph 3, I gave the number of it. Officers saying it could be considered an option. And I'm just puzzled that we haven't been able to go firmer and say that's where it's going.
Response, Chair, is that we do not know. I mean, obviously, this isn't the only potentially constrained site in the county where a developer will have to come up with information on what size of vehicle they will be using to bring deliveries to the site. But the point that Chris was making is that we rely upon a developer to pay for, to do the swept path analysis. We shouldn't be doing that for a developer. So that's where that condition also requires a developer to do that investigative work to assess if another route is going to be used for construction vehicles, which could well be the case here. We need to know what vehicles are going to use that road. And if they are larger vehicles to take abnormal loads, will that create an issue for the hedge to hedge, verge to verge width of Coach Road? Until we know the vehicle size and what they would be bringing along that route, it's difficult for officers to make a judgment call at this stage. We are saying that Coach Road is there, it's adoptable, it's available. We just need to know the detail from the developer. What vehicles would you be using to make sure that they're not interfering with the amenities of the residents of Millbrook Estate? It's a standard position we've been in many, many times across the county where we are saying for outline it's a principal issue that's up for debate ultimately, and the construction, routing, all the details relating to construction vehicles, the timing, the number and size and all the rest of it is a condition requirement. It's not something we're introducing as a new issue. It's a standard requirement this council imposes upon many developers across the county, and it's something that our highways team get engaged with on a regular basis. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I mean, I'm reasonably hopeful that this is doable, but I'm a bit puzzled that nobody seems to ask that question yet. Is that the position?
Before this item came to the April committee, we made it quite clear to the developer that there would be some key issues that we envisaged that they would have to address. We obviously assumed that they would be coming to committee, and it's very unfortunate that on 2 occasions they've not been able to come along. So we're not speaking for a developer, we're just setting out the facts in terms of what we've attempted to do on behalf of. And we've made all attempts possible to get them to accept that construction vehicle construction vehicles should not solely be using the Millbrook estate. And from what Verity has told me, they accept that is the position. What we now need to know is what vehicles will they be using along alternative routes. We need to know the routes, we need to know what vehicles will use which route, and as we've heard today, that if there's alternative routes, then that needs to be signed and it needs to be subject to an agreement that they will be making sure and managing operations on site with a banks person, if that's the right term, I think it is, so that all site operatives follow that route. And as I've said, we went down that same process for the urban extension, Councillor Newbury at Warminster. And as you may recall, the very first phase had to go through St Andrews Road, and the residents there were very alarmed that the construction vehicles would only go through their estate. And we said, well, unfortunately, that is the only route for that first part because there is nothing else available. In this case, there are other alternative routes, and there is a material difference between this application and the Drynham Lane appeal decision, because we've got a case here where we know there's land to the east, we've got an adoptable road, Coach Road, that's to the west of this, sorry, to the east of the site, and it's over to the developer if this application is endorsed to come forward with a robust routing plan, full details of all the construction relating information that we need. There's nothing in that condition that's not reasonable, and that is a key element of all planning conditions. So we're fully comfortable with the recommendation and that the condition will be adhered to. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, sir. I think a very brief synopsis of that is, should this receive permission today, it still couldn't go ahead until the planning officers are content with how they're going to get access to the site. So not saying, yes, you can get there. We're saying, yes, you've got to agree it with the officers before you do anything. Okay, thank you. Yeah, indeed. Councillor, sorry. Smith.
Thank you. Yeah, just stepping back and looking at the overall scheme again, I think as a council would find it very difficult to defend the principle of development on this particular site, given the lack of the neighbourhood plan, given the NPPF sort of screaming at us that we need to build houses, and there seems to be very little defence for us, particularly in a location like this. So I do think taking Councillor Newbury's point, we really do need to be thinking about mitigating the impact on residents of that estate. And I'm just wondering whether, I totally get that the condition for a construction management plan is there, is a way of beefing it up and explicitly saying we do not want construction traffic through that estate. Is that something that we can say at this stage?
But I would say that until we know the type of vehicle and the size of vehicle, I don't think it would be reasonable to be very explicit to say no construction vehicle, because you get small lorries that will absolutely have no impact on that local estate route, because you'll have larger vehicles using that estate route that access existing houses or developments that are taking place on individual householders. That's something else to bear in mind in terms of enforceability. If you've got a property on that estate that's getting some extension work done, you will have other construction vehicles accessing that particular property. I think it comes down to the level of detail, the reasonableness of that condition, and officers, as I've said before, we deal with this on a regular basis for all estates, all schemes, and we do rigidly require developers to come forward with that level of information. I do accept that the local residents are very concerned about potential amenity issues, loss of potential on-street parking, children playing in the streets. That is very material, and it's taken into account. We've certainly factored in, Verity and I, before the report was finalised. The construction traffic management plan is a very robust document if it's done properly. If it's not done properly, officers will not be supporting it. Simple as that. And as Councillor Clark rightly said, that if a developer submits a misleading or deficient plan, they won't be developing the site. because they need to get that approved before any works commence on site. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, do you mind if I just add to that?
Sure thing.
I just go on to that point again. It's just that we have added a note to the construction traffic management plan, a condition to, again, just highlight the fact that we do expect them to be looking at all possible alternative routes. So again, we are sort of expecting, as Kenny's already sort of made reference to, sort of a full kind of comprehensive sort of assessment of what options are available, why maybe some have been discounted and what routes they are actually looking to use. So again, we have sort of added a note onto that condition, sort of expecting there to be an assessment of all potential construction traffic routes to gain access to the site.
Okay, thank you. Councillor White.
Thank you, Andrew. Just following on from that, have officers experienced any other previous situations where they've made an absolute condition that no access cannot be through a residential before getting details of what size of vehicle and how much plant is going to be shifted? Has that ever happened in the past?
To be honest, no. So we obviously, the conditions do get reworded, to use a previous phrase, beefed up from time to time, so that we're more rigid in terms of what the councils require. So there may well be historic cases where a condition didn't actually meet the true purpose of what was required, but we will be expecting, because we've had that conversation with this developer, we've made it very clear what our expectations and what we've heard from the committee in April. So we fully expect a level of detail and full surveys of alternative routes to avoid the larger vehicles going through the estate, the abnormal loads going through the estate, and seeing what comes through in terms of the types of vehicles, size of the vehicles, the number of vehicles each day would service this development.
Just one other point. I mean, of course, you're the experts in this area, but the size of vehicle will not affect the amount of materials that's going to have to be delivered to a site. So arguably, some of the objections raised about safety and parking are not going to be significantly impacted by the size of vehicle. Of course, they wouldn't want big articulated trucks, but if you have smaller, the applicant provides you with detail, they're going to produce them all on scooters. I don't know, sorry, I'm not being facetious. The volume of material and equipment is still going to be the same. So I still don't quite understand why we can't make it a condition now that it doesn't go through that residential area. But then I know nothing.
The position we're in is that the highways team have made it quite clear that the estate is available for vehicles. We do not know the size of the vehicle. There are alternatives to the estate. So our position, quite rightly, to avoid local residents experiencing the worst of the vehicles, is that we are encouraging the use of Coach Road. As a developer, they will want to use the quickest route, the route that doesn't involve hazards, and as we've heard from local residents, if their selected vehicles are going to encounter tight bends, parked cars, as opposed to Coach Road, which will have no vehicles for the vast majority of time, then we would expect that they would be identifying that as the route.
Okay,
because it would
just
be
a
the
question.
most
Thank
efficient,
you.
cost-effective route.
Thank you.
Councillor Newbury.
Thank you, Chairman. I think the crunch question, Kenny, is can we or can we not impose a condition to say no vehicles above a certain size to go through the residential streets?
My instinct is say no at this stage, because we are saying in that condition quite clearly that it's over to you, developer, to show us how you envisage this site being developed. To try and enforce a condition when that road is also used by other properties that may well be getting extensions. We don't want to be ending up with an enforcement situation where we think vehicles are accessing the site when they're not, and they're actually accessing a different development within the estate. We want to know from the developer what size of vehicles would you be using and what route would those vehicles be taking. To say that this development can only take place by putting an exclusion for certain types of vehicles, I don't think that would meet the tests of a reasonable condition. I think the other way around it is to put the ball in the developer's court to say, how are you going to develop this site and what vehicles are you going to be using? And then we can look at the routes that would be most appropriate for those vehicles with full consultation with the highways team and the developer looking at swept path analysis, widths of all the roads that they would be identifying, including Coach Road, and as well a potential joint haulage route through that land that's coming forward in our new local plan. I think the combination of those would mean that a condition prohibiting all HGV traffic through the estate would be unenforceable and unreasonable.
What would be the downside of us putting such a condition? I mean, the applicant would then have to decide whether they accepted it or not. But if they did accept it, no problem. If they didn't accept it, they could appeal against it, couldn't they?
Thank you. Understand the legal officer would like to say something.
Just to add to Kenny's comments about imposing a condition nonetheless, Kenny's quite right that the applicant could, and I suspect would, appeal against such a condition. And it seems to me highly unlikely that an inspector on appeal would impose such a condition. He would impose the condition that we are currently proposing to impose.
Okay, thank you. I think that the officers have certainly got the gist from this committee that access to the site is of major importance. Councillor Greenman.
Thank you, Chair. I take that point. The fact is, though, we don't know whether the condition would be unreasonable or not. We haven't tested it. And the issue that we faced last time when we looked at this was that, and I am disappointed the developer isn't here. I think that's rude, frankly. I have refused to, if you remember 2 years ago, I did refuse to listen to a case because the developer didn't turn up. I think the least they could do is give us the courtesy of coming along to the meeting. So I'm hugely disappointed they haven't done that. I know I was probably stretching the point 2 years ago, but I got away with it nonetheless. The issue is that Coach Road came up last time. It was mentioned by a number of members of the committee, and they had every opportunity to test this and to do the homework on this before this came back to committee today. And as I see it, they failed to do so. And so the onus, in my view, isn't on the committee to make a decision over whether we think it's right or not. They're the ones that need to justify it. They need to legitimize what it is that they're putting forward. So I have to say I'm enormously disappointed that they haven't looked at this. I do know this piece. I have taken the opportunity to be out to go out there. I think it's wholly unreasonable and untenable to expect any construction traffic to come down through the residential area. And we did this to death back in April, and I think that's exactly why we wanted them to look at Coach Road. And I wanted a rather more definitive response than we have today to whether Coach Road is workable or not. I am disappointed on that score, I have to say.
Chair, can I just come back in, please? So on the back of what Councillor Greenman has just mentioned, I think there is the option here for a further update or beefing up of the note that's attached to the condition, to the effect that if the developer comes forward with the requisite information, that the route through the Millbrook estate is only considered if the developer can convince the council that there's no other option available. So that would put a further burden on the developer to provide full details to the council that Coach Road isn't available, can't be used for the vehicles that they're using, there's no route for the haulage route through the land to the east, or anywhere else that may be available ultimately. So the note could be added to. Perhaps the paragraph's a bit long as it is, so we might need to break it up. But we could add that further weight to that requirement so that the developer knows the hierarchy or the sequential approach in terms of what this council expects them to do.
Thank you for that, Kenny. I appreciate that. Just wanted to come back on that. When you mentioned earlier, quite correctly, the issue in Warminster, where the first phase did go down through the residential. But of course, as you also pointed out, and I do remember that case well, they had no choice. And the developer, we're aware of that. The developer did look into that. It appears, to all intents and purposes, that the developer hasn't looked at that at all as yet. That's why I'm disappointed that we're in the position that we're at, because they do have an option, they just haven't explored it.
We don't know that they've not looked at it. They're just saying that that is a follow-up requirement that they are fully committed to doing. They know that this committee and officers are steering them towards that requirement. I wouldn't say they've not looked at it. They've certainly came back and said at this particular stage the agreements with the land to the east, or the landowners to the east, isn't at such an advanced stage where they can agree to a haulage road option. But that might change, as I mentioned before, if that becomes an adopted site and we get an application. And I say application, I know there's an application actually already in for part of the site, but I don't know whether there's more than one landowner. And again, it comes back to the requirements. This is something the developer needs to do and provide the evidence to this council. It's not something we should be trying to engineer a decision and a solution for. They have to provide the evidence to us to satisfy this council that their scheme is going to be acceptable for construction traffic. So with the assistance of Nigel, I'm putting a further addition as a recommendation in that the condition 12, Verity, is added to the extent that the developer will also be obligated to submit to the council full evidence that there are no other options available other than the routes that they take or put forward. So if they come back with just one route, and that route is only through the Millbrook estate, we would expect all the evidence possible to show that that is the only option available. Sitting here today, we know Coach Road is available.
Thank you. So, Howard, would that be acceptable to you if the proposer and seconder were happy with that to be added in?
No, I want to listen to what everyone else has got to say. Yeah, I'm still.
Well, okay, well, can
I mean, I certainly welcome that.
Okay, well, if
That's a step in the right
if I
direction.
go to proposer and seconder, would you be happy for that? Right. Okay, so that's included in the substantive motion now. So, Howard, have you got anything else you wish to say about it? Christopher, you have spoken twice already.
Well, I know, but I've got some new information, Chairman. I've just checked online the 1936 25-inch Ordnance Survey map of Westbury, and what it shows is Coach Road having pretty much the same width as all the other streets in the town. So that suggests to me that it could be widened within its boundaries to provide as much width as you needed. Now, that triggers the thought in my mind, if we did need the developer to improve Coach Road, you know, within its existing width, so that it could be used for construction traffic, would we need some kind of a condition to achieve the improvement of Coach Road? And if we did, how would we cover that now?
What to you, Chris?
I think that would be included within the construction traffic management plan, that if they're proposing access via Coach Road and that it would require additional measures to ensure that access could be maintained safely, and that included a widening of Coach Road, then we can agree the parameters of that and the design of that as part of the construction traffic management plan. We would expect details to be submitted to that extent as part of that.
Okay, that's a good answer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Griffin.
Thank you, Chair. Coming to this point about Coach Road, it's been mentioned a few times during this meeting that it's currently unadopted. If it were to be adopted and widening work was required, it's about 250 metres from the southern end of it to the southern part of the site. Who would bear the cost of widening works in that case? Would that be for the developer or would it be for the council?
I'm assuming it would be the developer, but I don't know if Chris has got anything else to add on to that.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd expect the developer to bear the costs of any improvements required for construction traffic. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think that's everybody has spoken that wishes to. So, Councillor Palmer, as you the proposer, if you wish to sum up.
I don't think there's anything additional to say, really. I think we've been through this, but it is a compromise, as all these applications end up being.
Okay, thank you. With that, then we'll go to the vote. Can I ask those in favour, please show? And any against? And any abstentions? Okay, in that case, that motion is carried. So thank you very much indeed for coming along, and I'm sure the officers are well aware of the concern of this committee with regards to the highways. Thank you everybody for attending, and just to remind you, the next meeting of this committee will be on the 1st of July. So thank you very much indeed.
Same place, same time?
Oh, absolutely. Thank you.